The rain had started before dawn, tapping against the windows of the small Virginia cabin like impatient fingers. Inside, Colonel Robert Keene sat in his worn leather chair, a mug of black coffee untouched beside him, and a stack of faded military files spread across his desk. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from recognition. On the screen of the shortwave receiver, a line of faint Morse code flashed again. He blinked, leaned closer, and replayed it. It wasn't possible. That exact code had been transmitted 72 years ago, on the night of December 3rd, 1952, during the final chaotic months of the Korean War. And it had come from a man everyone believed dead, Sergeant William Reddick. Keene exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but his memory for Morse was flawless. He had trained Reddick himself. The code translated to 3 haunting words. The silent code lives. He switched off the receiver, staring into the dim light of dawn breaking through the trees. Impossible, he muttered. They buried that frequency. They buried him. He opened the old field report once more. The pages were yellowed, corners torn, bloodstained from another lifetime. Operation Hollow Echo failed. All units lost. Cause: enemy infiltration and radio sabotage. Keene's name appeared 3 lines below the signature of the commanding officer. He had signed the report that declared his closest friend a traitor. Later that morning, he drove into town, his '74 Ford groaning along the wet road. He parked outside the VFW Hall, a veterans gathering place where time itself seemed reluctant to move. The sign above the door read, "Brothers Never Forgotten." Inside, the smell of coffee and old tobacco hung thick in the air. A few men nodded as he entered, but most were too deep in their own silences to notice. At the bar sat Captain Harold Hawk Jensen, one of the few survivors from their old unit. His hair had gone white, his eyes still sharp. "Keene?" Hawk squinted. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." They sat in the corner booth, the rain drumming steadily outside. Keene pulled a small notepad from his coat and wrote the Morse pattern across it. Hawk frowned. "You're kidding? That's Reddick's signature. His call code." "I know. Could be a prank. Some radio nerd digging through archives." Keene shook his head. "I checked the frequency. It's the same restricted band we used for covert ops. Only 3 men ever knew it existed. You, me, and him." The silence between them grew heavier. Hawk leaned forward. "You think someone's using his ID?" "I think," Keene said slowly, "someone doesn't want the truth to stay buried." That night, he went home and opened the old lockbox beneath his bed. Inside were relics he had sworn never to touch again. A tarnished lighter engraved, "Stay low, talk less," a combat knife wrapped in cloth, and a photo 5 young men smiling against the backdrop of a Korean hillside. Reddick stood at the center, his grin crooked, his hand resting on Keene's shoulder. Behind them, faintly visible, a radio antenna jutted out from the rocks. That radio had sent the last transmission of Hollow Echo. Keene stared at the photograph for a long time. "You were never the traitor, were you?" he whispered. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, echoing like distant artillery. 2 days later, Keene visited the National Archives in D.C., flashing his old credentials. They barely let him in, but the name still carried weight. He asked for Operation Hollow Echo records. The clerk returned with a single file. Thin, too thin. Keene flipped through it, his jaw tightening. The pages were mostly blacked out, redacted beyond recognition, but one corner of a classified memo remained legible. Priority retrieval. Code fragment read for C. Contained within Reddick unit transmission. Possible encryption anomaly. He wrote the fragment down. Read for C. When he left the building, a dark sedan was parked across the street. He noticed it because the same car had followed him the day before. Gray, tinted windows, military tags. Keene paused on the steps, watching the rain slide down his coat sleeve. He smiled grimly. So the ghosts have drivers now. He took a different route home. At night, sleep eluded him. Instead, he replayed that Morse sequence over and over, trying to decipher a deeper layer. The rhythm was strange, deliberate, almost like there was a hidden code inside the code. He scribbled across his notebook, "TSCL, the silent code lives," or something else. Suddenly he froze. What if lives wasn't a word, but an acronym? Le Bavesse. Location intercept via encrypted signal. He scrambled for his map drawer, pulled out the old Korea field maps, traced his finger along a series of coordinates burned into his memory. If the signal was genuine, it had to originate near the 38th parallel close to where Hollow Echo had vanished. Keene's pulse quickened. He hadn't felt this alive in years. He made a decision that would change everything. By morning, he was at the Pentagon's Visitor Access Office, requesting a clearance renewal. The clerk blinked at his request. "Sir, you've been retired for 30 years. Then unretire me." They refused, of course. But Keene didn't need permission. He still had friends in the shadows, men who owed him favors. That night, an encrypted email arrived on his burner laptop. It contained one thing: GPS coordinates in rural Korea and a phrase, "If you go, don't go alone." He closed the laptop slowly. The silent code wasn't just a ghost signal. It was bait. 2 weeks later, Robert Keene was on a flight to Seoul under an alias. The moment he stepped onto Korean soil, old memories came flooding back: the smell of diesel and wet canvas, the metallic sting of cold air. He hired a translator and a jeep, heading north toward the demilitarized zone. Along the way, he passed villages, rebuilt from rubble, children playing where tanks once burned. His translator, a young man named Jun, glanced over nervously. "You sure this place safe, Mr. Keene?" "No," Keene replied. "That's how I know I'm close." As they neared the hills, the GPS beeped softly. The signal grew stronger, and then, faintly through static, he heard it again, that same 3-word message, now distorted. The silent code. "Waits." Jun looked at him, confused. "What that mean?" Keene didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the ridge ahead, the same ridge where, 70 years ago, his unit had vanished. The rain began again. They reached the top just before dusk. The landscape was quiet to quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the steady hum of something electric, something buried. Keene took a few steps forward and then froze. Half buried in the mud lay a rusted metal box, its lid stamped with the faded insignia of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. He knelt, brushing away dirt. The markings were barely visible, but one stood out clearly: Reddick Serial 01942, property of U.S. Army. His throat tightened. He opened the box carefully. Inside was an old transmitter, damaged, corroded, but a faint green light still blinked. It was still transmitting. He pressed the side button, and the device whined softly, then emitted one final pulse of Morse code before dying completely. Keene decoded it on instinct. The message was simple, chilling. "They know you found me." Jun stepped back, frightened. Who know? But Keene already knew the answer. The same people who buried Reddick's name. The same people who made him sign that report. And if they were still listening, that meant the war wasn't over, not for him. He looked at the transmitter one last time, whispering under his breath, "All right, old friend. Let's finish what we started." The wind howled over the ridge, carrying with it a faint echo of static, like a ghost whispering through time. And far away, in an office, lit by sterile light, a red indicator flashed on a secure monitor. A voice on the intercom spoke quietly, "We've got movement on Hollow Echo." The flight home was longer than Robert Keene remembered. The hum of the engines became a strange lullaby of regret. He stared out the window, the Pacific clouds rolling beneath him like a gray sea. Somewhere over that endless ocean lay the bodies of men who never came home, and one truth that refused to stay buried. When the plane landed at Dulles, 2 men in dark suits were waiting. They didn't need to say his name, their silence did it for them. "Colonel Keene," one said politely, flashing credentials from the Defense Intelligence Command. "You'll come with us." Keene didn't argue. Men like them didn't ask. They collected. He was taken to a gray government building in Arlington, its windows blacked out, the air inside sterile and cold. In the interrogation room, the hum of the fluorescent lights was louder than their questions. A younger officer entered, mid-30s, clean-cut, too confident for his own good. "Colonel, do you have any idea how many laws you violated by entering the DMs?" Keene's tone was calm. "Do you have any idea how many graves I walked over to get there?" The officer didn't respond. He set a folder on the table. You went looking for something that doesn't exist. Operation Hollow Echo was closed in 1953. Keene leaned forward slowly. If it doesn't exist, why are you still keeping files on it? That earned him silence. Then another voice spoke from behind the one-way mirror. A woman this time. Older, calm, commanding. Bring him in. The door opened, and the officer stepped aside. In the adjoining room stood Director Evelyn Grant, a figure Keene hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. Her presence carried the kind of weight that could silence a battlefield. "Robert," she said softly, "I thought you were done chasing ghosts." He smiled thinly. "Seems the ghosts weren't done with me." Grant motioned toward a table. On it lay the rusted transmitter he'd found in Korea, now sealed in a clear evidence case, connected to diagnostic cables. Keene frowned. "You already had this frequency under surveillance, didn't you?" She didn't answer directly. "Do you know what that signal carried?" "I know it shouldn't exist." Grant looked at the screen. "We decrypted the final transmission you received. It wasn't random Morse. It contained embedded coordinates and a timestamp." She turned to face him. "The timestamp is from last week." Keene's jaw clenched. "That transmitter hasn't had power in 70 years. Grant nodded. "Exactly." She pressed a button on the console. The speakers crackled with static, then played back the faint beeping of the Morse signal. It repeated twice before a distorted voice broke through. Filtered and mechanical. "They killed him. Reddick wasn't the traitor." The court lied. The voice ended abruptly in a burst of static. Keene's breath caught. "That's not Reddick's voice." "Who the hell?" Grant cut him off. "We traced the audio modulation. It matches someone using your old cipher key." He blinked. "Mine?" "Yes. The one you used for encrypted field reports in 52. She slid a document across the table, a faded page stamped "Classified Eyes Only." The signature at the bottom sent a chill down his spine. "Elt. Colonel Robert Keene, authorization. Hollow Echo." He sat back, his heart pounding. "Someone's using my code to reopen the file." Grant nodded. "Or to frame you with it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Later that night, they released him under supervision, but Keene knew surveillance when he felt it. The same gray sedan was parked 2 blocks down from his house, engine idling, lights off. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and opened the old file again. Reddick's name stared back at him from the top of the report. Subject: suspected compromise of communication channels. Status: executed by friendly fire after refusal to surrender. Executed. That word had haunted him for decades. He remembered the night of the ambush vividly, the radio crackling, Reddick shouting through static, the explosion that swallowed half their team. The next morning, command ordered Keene to file the report and to declare Reddick's death as betrayal. He did it because they told him to, because war makes obedience look like honor. Around midnight, a soft knock came at the door. Keene froze, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver in his drawer. "Who's there?" a quiet voice replied. "Someone who believes Reddick was innocent." He opened the door carefully. Standing in the rain was a young woman, early 30s, soaked, holding a worn envelope. Her face was tense but determined. "My name's Emily Reddick," she said. "He was my grandfather." Keene's throat tightened. He stepped aside wordlessly. She sat by the fireplace, wringing her hands as she spoke. "I found a letter in my grandmother's belongings after she passed. It was written by my grandfather, dated the night before his death. He mentioned you." Keene's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. "If I don't make it back, tell Keene I know it wasn't his fault. They're listening to us. The real enemy isn't across the line, it's inside the command tent." Keene's jaw clenched. He knew. Emily nodded. He was transmitting something important that night, something they didn't want to reach. "Washington." He leaned closer. "Do you still have the original transmission?" She nodded and pulled out a small flash drive. "I digitized it. My grandmother kept his field radio all these years. The battery was dead, but the data crystal inside was still intact." Keene's pulse raced. That could be the last message before the ambush. They loaded the file into his laptop. The sound filled the room, the faint buzz of Morse code, the rhythm deliberate and haunting. Keene began decoding it, manually, whispering each symbol under his breath. After 5 minutes, the final phrase appeared on the screen. Operation Red Crown, order cancelled, friendly strike authorized. Emily frowned. What does that mean? Keene exhaled shakily. It means someone high up called in an airstrike on our own men to erase evidence. He turned toward her. Your grandfather tried to stop it. That's why they called him a traitor. The realization hit them both at once. Outside, thunder rolled again, and headlights flashed through the window. The gray sedan had returned. Keene closed the laptop, grabbed the envelope, and motioned toward the back door. We have to go. They slipped out through the woods behind the cabin. The rain came harder, drowning their footsteps. Behind them, the cabin lights flickered once, then exploded in a burst of orange flame. Emily gasped. They're trying to kill us. Keene's voice was grim. No, they're trying to bury the truth again. They drove through the night, not stopping until they reached a deserted airfield outside Quantico. Keene contacted an old friend, Major Thomas Avery, now a Pentagon analyst who owed him more than one favor. When Avery saw the drive's contents, he paled. Robert, this isn't just about Hollow Echo. The operation was part of a network. Operation Red Crown was a covert arms deal with South Korean intelligence. When it went wrong, they erased everyone involved. Keene slammed his fist on the table. Including Reddick. Avery nodded. And the one who signed off the cover-up was a general named Arthur Mason. He's still alive. Retired. Lives out in Maryland. Keene's eyes narrowed. Then he's the next stop. They reached Mason's estate at dawn. The old general was sitting on his porch, watching the sunrise, a cane across his lap. When he saw Keene, he smiled faintly. I wondered how long it would take before you came knocking. Keene stepped forward. You buried 40 men, Mason. You labeled one of them a traitor to protect a weapons deal. Mason didn't flinch. And you signed the report, Robert. Don't play innocent. The words hit harder than a bullet. Emily stepped forward. My grandfather died because of you. Mason looked at her sadly. Your grandfather died saving the lives of others. I made sure his body was never recovered so the world would forget. Because if they knew what he stopped. He trailed off. Keene grabbed him by the collar. What did he stop? Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. A biological weapon transfer. American-made. Reddick intercepted it. He tried to send proof. I got the transmission. I was ordered to destroy it. He coughed weakly. I followed orders, Keene. Just like you did. Keene stepped back, disgusted. That's not honor. That's cowardice with medals. Mason's eyes dimmed. Maybe, but honor dies quietly, doesn't it? He pointed toward a small lockbox on the porch table. Everything you're looking for is in there. My confession. My last atonement. Moments later, his head slumped forward. He was gone. Inside the box were old film reels, maps, and a document sealed with the Pentagon crest. Keene unrolled it and read aloud. Subject: Operation Red Crown. Objective: prevent exposure of unauthorized weapons transfer. Authorization: Joint Chiefs classified by executive order. He exhaled shakily. This goes all the way up. Emily looked at him. What do we do now? He stared toward the horizon. We finish what Reddick started. That night, Keene uploaded Mason's confession, the decoded message, and the original operation files to an encrypted whistleblower server timed for public release within 24 hours. He poured himself one last drink and looked at the flickering firelight. For you, Reddick. For all of them. But as he set the glass down, a red laser dot appeared briefly across his chest. He froze. Outside, a car engine started. Then silence. He turned slowly toward the window, but no one was there, just the whisper of whine through the trees. He smiled faintly. Guess the ghosts are back on duty. The morning air was colder than usual. A fog drifted low across the fields of Virginia, rolling like an old memory refusing to fade. Inside his cabin, Colonel Robert Keene sat before the flickering light of his computer screen, watching the upload timer crawl toward completion. 97%, 98%, 99%. When it reached 100, the screen flashed. Transmission successful, files distributed to 112 global outlets. He exhaled slowly, the weight of 70 years finally beginning to lift. The truth, the whole truth was out there now. Operation Hollow Echo, Red Crown, Reddick's final message, Mason's confession. All of it. Keene leaned back in his chair, staring at the old radio transmitter sitting on his desk. The green light on it was dead now, but he kept it there, a relic of everything he'd lost and everything he'd finally reclaimed. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like distant static. Hours passed. The world, he knew, was about to explode. And it did. By noon, the story had broken across major networks. Declassified documents reveal 1950 seconds military cover-up. Retired colonel exposes hidden biological weapon operation. Hero branded a traitor vindicated 70 years later. They used Reddick's photo. They used Keene's voice clip from an old interview. The narrative spread like wildfire, and with it came chaos. Phones rang. Old officials denied everything. Lawyers scrambled. Senators called emergency briefings. And in the middle of it all, Robert Keene sat alone, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the storm unfold from his porch. He didn't want glory. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted silence, the kind that meant peace, not erasure. By evening, the news trucks had arrived outside the gate. He ignored them. The floodlights painted the trees in harsh white, and reporters shouted questions that blurred together into meaningless noise. Colonel Keene, did you personally authorize the transmission? Do you fear prosecution for leaking classified materials? What do you have to say to the families of those who died? He closed the blinds. Inside, the fire crackled. Emily Reddick sat across from him, exhaustion written on her face. "They're saying you're a hero," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "That's usually what they say right before they decide you're a threat." Emily frowned. "You did the right thing." He shook his head. "I did what should have been done 70 years ago." The phone rang. He didn't answer. It rang again and again. Finally, he picked it up. A familiar voice came through the static. "Robert." It was Evelyn Grant. "They're coming for you," she said flatly. "You've embarrassed too many ghosts with stars on their shoulders. I figured as much. I tried to delay the order, but it's out of my hands. They're calling it a containment operation." Keene chuckled bitterly. "They always have such pretty words for cleaning up the truth. Get out while you can, Evelyn. I'm tired of running." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "Then at least make it count." He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, rain returned, soft, steady, familiar. It carried the smell of gun oil and old forests, the scent of every battlefield he thought he'd left behind. Emily paced the living room. "We can still go. I have contacts overseas. Whistleblower protection programs." Keene raised a hand. "No, this isn't your fight anymore. You'll die here." He smiled. "Then I'll die where the truth finally spoke." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You sound like him." He looked up. "Like Reddick?" She nodded. "He wrote in his last letter that silence can kill as fast as bullets. He said truth is just another form of courage." Keene's eyes glistened. "Then I suppose it runs in the family." At 2:14 a.m., the power went out. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The lights died. And from somewhere outside came the faint crunch of boots on wet gravel. Keene's instincts returned instantly. The soldier inside him never really retired. He motioned Emily toward the cellar. "Stay down there, no matter what happens." "But, go." She hesitated, then obeyed. He moved to the desk, opened a drawer, and retrieved his sidearm, the same .45 he'd carried through the Korean winter. He loaded a single magazine, chambered a round, and turned off the safety. The sound outside grew closer. 3, maybe 4 men. Professional. No shouting, no flashlights. He crouched near the window, the glow of lightning briefly illuminating the trees. Through the rain, he saw them: black uniforms, suppressed weapons, night vision goggles. They weren't here to arrest him. The first shot shattered the window. Keene dropped low, returning fire instinctively. 2 silhouettes fell. The others scattered, moving like shadows between the trees. He ducked behind the couch, counting rounds, breathing slow and steady. Age hadn't dulled his aim, just his patience. A voice called from outside. "Colonel Keene, stand down. You've done enough damage." He recognized the tone: calm, official, rehearsed. The kind of voice that always arrived just before the eraser stroke in history. He shouted back, "You can't erase ghosts, son." Another volley of gunfire. The air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and rain. Minutes later, silence returned. Then a new sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping from the corner of the room. Keene turned his head toward the old transmitter. Its dead light had flickered back to life, weak, trembling, but alive. He crawled closer, staring as the machine blinked out one final Morse sequence. He smiled faintly, decoding it by instinct. "Live, Robert, live." For the first time in years, he laughed, a deep, rough laugh that echoed through the broken windows. "You stubborn bastard." The rain fell harder. Thunder rolled. Outside, the remaining soldiers regrouped, moving in formation. Inside, Keene sat before the transmitter, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, fingers trembling as he reached for the key. He tapped back slowly, "Mission complete." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Tell her." He was never the traitor. When the agents breached the door, they found only silence. The radio was still glowing faintly, static humming through the speakers. On the floor lay Colonel Keene, still, peaceful, faint smile on his face. On the wall behind him, illuminated by a single lantern, hung a photo of 5 young men standing on a Korean hillside. Someone had written beneath it in careful pen, "They buried our names, but not our honor." Days later, across the country, news channels began receiving an encrypted audio transmission. It started with static, then the faint rhythm of Morse code. Reporters called it the ghost broadcast. No one could trace its origin. When decoded, it reads simply, "The silent code lives." The same message that started it all. Emily Reddick attended his funeral at Arlington 2 weeks later. The skies were gray, the air sharp with cold. A folded flag lay across the casket, its edges trembling in the wind. As the honor guard fired the 3 volleys, she whispered, "He finished it, Grandpa." He really did. Among the crowd stood Evelyn Grant, her expression unreadable. She approached Emily quietly and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single page handwritten in Keene's unmistakable scrawl. "For Emily, if you're reading this, then the truth finally spoke. Don't let them turn it into noise. Remember the men who stayed silent so others could speak." Emily folded the note carefully, tears sliding down her face. She looked up at the horizon, where the clouds parted just enough for sunlight to break through. For a moment, it felt like the light saluted back. That night, in a Pentagon archive room sealed by concrete and history, a young analyst was reviewing satellite data when he noticed something odd. A faint blip of radio interference was still pinging from the Korean peninsula. Same frequency, same signal strength. He frowned and ran the decoder. The message repeated over and over. "Mission complete. Truth confirmed." The analyst stared at the screen, uncertain whether to report it or just listen. Outside, thunder rolled across the Potomac, a soft echo that felt like applause. And for those who knew how to hear it, the silence said everything.